Good evening. Welcome to the February 21, 2023 City Council meeting. The meeting is hereby called to order. Members of the public may attend this City Council meeting in person or may watch and listen remotely by viewing the meeting on Channel 8 WCTV and at the city's website at www.wayzata.org/WCTV. Public comment during the public forum and/or public hearing portions of the meeting may be provided in person at the meeting, in advance, or by logging into the Zoom call and raising your hand during the public hearing. When your name is called in the meeting, you will be seen and heard in our council chambers and the cable channel. You will be asked to unmute, and then you may begin your comment. All public comments must include your full name and address. Second item this evening on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I would ask everyone to please stand and follow along. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next item on this evening agenda is the roll call. Please note that all members of the council are present except for Councilmember Iverson, who has an excused absence this evening. Also like to note that earlier this evening, the council participated in a workshop and discussed three topics. First, the review and discussion of the 2022 downtown Wayzata parking study, an update of the city's progress with emerald ash borer mitigation, and an HRA update on affordable housing policy and Maggie Manor 2. Next item on the agenda this evening is to approve the agenda. I would like to note that we will be tabling through a formal action by the council items 8C and 8D. But otherwise, would someone care to make a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I'll make that motion, Madam Mayor, to
Thank
approve
you.
the agenda as outlined.
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion has been first and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion passes. The next item is the public forum. Just as a reminder for members of the public in attendance this evening who are interested in speaking, we ask that you please state your name and address and indicate if you're representing a group. We also ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. If the item you wish to speak about is something that is on the agenda, for those that are in person, please fill out a form at the table in the back of the room and hand it to staff. For those who are watching via Zoom, please send a note via chat to staff and let them know which agenda item you'd wish to speak about. We also require that your camera be turned on when you speak. City Manager, do we have any remote comments as part of the public forum?
Madam Mayor, we do not at this point in time, but it looks like somebody just logged on. So we'll double check a little bit later to make sure that she didn't have something to comment about.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. We did receive one form for the public forum from Mr. Chris Hickman.
I'll keep it brief. As I think the city council knows, I'm quite the socialite in town, and I do visit quite a few of the restaurants in town, not always equally, but it's come to my attention that
Excuse me.
you want, Chris Hickman,
Thank you.
484 Highcroft Road. I know all of you know who I am, perhaps not the audience. Highcroft Road in Wayzata. It came to my attention that you're proposing a 0.5% of sales tax for the restaurants, and most of them feel that everyone should, or 1%, and everyone feels that you should be charging everyone, all the business, a 0.5% across the board in TIF District 6, because that's going to be who's going to be affected with the Panaway District. I couldn't agree more. I brought this up with the mayor 3 years ago that this should have been a referendum. And there's something I want to also bring up. If we have a $175,000 bid on something, we need 3 different bids. It comes time now for our city, if we're going to have a 10 million or 14 million project, that maybe it should come up for referendum for all the citizens, because that's actually eventually who's going to be paying for this. I know you keep saying that the tax levy will not be affected by any of the taxpayers. We tried that the last time. did not work. Taxpayers ended up on the hook. Bonds are paid by the taxpayers of Wayzata. The interests are paid, the balloon payment that comes callable is paid by us. It's not a gift from the city. It's not a gift from the government. They do not print money in the state of Minnesota. That is my point. And I think most of the restaurants would agree with me. And now we just lost 3 of our food establishments, and now we're worrying about whether Anthropology is going to close down. We need to start addressing our retail businesses better. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for some clarification, City Manager, we certainly don't have to respond to comments during the public forum, but I think there's perhaps some misunderstanding. Could you clarify a little bit about the intent and purpose of the food and beverage tax that is not a done deal, but has actually just this morning, there was a hearing about it, a little bit about the background, who's paying for it, and the reason why we're even exploring a food and beverage tax?
Happy to, Mayor. So yeah, there was a hearing this morning at the Capitol. In January, the City Council directed staff to, and passed a resolution to pursue a sales tax, a food and beverage sales tax for Wayzata. What that means is we go through the legislative process with the hopes of potentially getting that allowance to do that. Ultimately, any action on it would have to come back to the City Council, whether it's just the City Council voting on it or a referendum. But what the sales tax would provide, whatever percentage it would be for a sales tax just on sale restaurant establishments, food or beverage. So that includes the muni as well. And that would go to pay for both operations and future capital needs. We found out that during a study a couple years ago that 90% of the people that visit our restaurants are from outside of Wayzata. So this would be a way to diversify our revenues. And, obviously all the visitors, the activity in town does create a strain on city services, whether they're coming here for restaurants, to walk around the lake or other reasons. There's a strain on our services and our infrastructure. So this would allow for a significant amount of revenue to come in to help relieve that and diversify our revenues to decrease the burden on our property taxpayers. That's what was really the goal from the council originally, to decrease that burden and to diversify our revenues to make our city more resilient from a financial perspective. And we think that this would be a good opportunity, but there's still a lot to go through. There's more engagement that we need to do, talking to the restaurant owners, getting more insight from the community. And then ultimately, hopefully we're in a position where we can move forward with something that will help us meet our ultimate goal.
And can you clarify, this isn't a tax on the restaurant establishments. This is a 0.5% to 1% tax that is added onto a patron's bill. So it is a pass-through through the restaurants.
Yep.
Correct.
That's exactly right. And I forgot to mention that there's only a few types of opportunities for cities to have this local tax. There's a local option sales tax, which really allows for cities to pay for things like community centers or big infrastructure projects. And then there's a lodging tax where cities can establish that, and they can use that money for like an establishment of a visitors and convention bureau. The food and beverage tax is the only tax that would allow us to pay for operations, which would truly get rid of or truly reduce the burden on city property taxpayers. So we're unique. Wayzata is a really unique community, and we have a thriving restaurant scene. So we're hoping that, based on that uniqueness, that this tax might be more appropriate than the others.
And part of that tax that was described would help fund for police officers as well, because there was an indication from the restaurants that we needed more of a police presence because of the number of patrons that were in and about town.
Absolutely, yep.
Okay. And then we'll talk about the bonding proposal that's before us this evening.
Yep.
At the appropriate time, and answer those questions and clear up any misunderstanding at that juncture. Okay. Any other public comments online?
Nope.
Okay, very good. Then we will move on to new agenda items. Any members of the council wish to discuss or have any new agenda items they'd like to discuss at a future meeting? No? No? All right. Then moving on to the consent agenda, this evening we have approval of the City Council workshop and regular meeting minutes of February 7, 2023. We have approval of the check register. We have approval of municipal licenses. We have receipt of the police activity report. We have receipt of the building activity report. We have adoption of Resolution 09-2023 approving a joint powers agreement between the University of Minnesota and the City of Wayzata for use of competitive bidding contracts for supplies, commodities, and equipment. We have approval of professional services agreement with Civitas, Inc. for Panaway Dock Working Group. And we have approval of expenditures related to council out-of-state travel. Do any of the council members have any questions or wish to pull an item for separate discussion? No? All right. Then is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Madam Mayor, so moved.
And a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? That motion passes as well. And we will move on to new business. Under new business this evening, our first item is to consider approval of the first reading of ordinance number 824, authorizing the issuance of general obligation temporary tax increment bonds for Panaway on Wayzata Bay, and adoption of Resolution 12-2023, authorizing issuance and sale of general obligation temporary tax increment bonds series 2023A. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Quite a mouthful. So tonight, kind of in layman's terms, because that title is long, what I'm going to talk about, and I have some help with me too, is really the commencement. Oh, did I push that? I'm sorry. The commencement of a legally required process to bond for the construction of the boardwalk and the dock components. It's a critical action tonight to move forward with Panaway. There's two actions associated with this. The next item on the agenda correlates that with the construction component, but this is the funding which we need to have approval or consider before we move on to construction. So specifically, the two actions that are required or needed in order to move forward are the consideration of the first reading of the ordinance to issue bonds. This is required per the city's charter anytime the city issues debt. This is a significant requirement, and it requires a 4/5 vote from the council. Subsequent to that is the adoption of a resolution calling for the sale or authorizing the issuance. This action really sets the details of this process, when we're going to call for the sale, all the dates, the amounts, everything like that. So if you think of it just high level, the first item is really just the solidifying, moving forward with issuing debt, and the second item is more the details. And tonight, in addition to me walking through it, I do have Stacy Kilvang of Ellers. He's here to answer any questions that the council has, as well as Grant Turpin of Dorsey and Whitney, our bond counsel. So just real quick, Panaway timeline. You can see on your monitors that if you look above the where we're at right now, 2023, February to April, is the bidding, contracting, award, and permitting for the boardwalks and dock. And that really encompasses funding as well. So I'm happy to report that we are on schedule, and based on the actions tonight, we'll still be on schedule, hopefully, to move forward with June construction. That's everything on the top of this timeline. Everything on the bottom is the section foreman's house, and you see that up until the end of this past year, I think the dates are a little off there, but we completed the design and the construction documents, so everything's ready to go with the section foreman's house. However, unlike the boardwalk and docks, we do not have financing in place for the construction or the maintenance and operations. So that part of this next phase, we call it 2A, is, or I'm sorry, 2B, is not ready to move forward because we don't have funding. Phase 2A, which is the boardwalk and docks, is ready to move forward because we have a funding plan. And that's really kind of what I want to talk to you about next. Before I do that, just a quick reminder, and kind of this dovetails into kind of the discussion earlier. There's been a lot that's happened with the just the funding planning as times have and conditions have changed. The project scope has changed. The market's changed, so that means costs have changed. But one thing that's been very consistent throughout, and this was the consensus from the council at the time in 2016 and even points before that, up until where we are right now, and that is that the primary funding for the construction of Panaway Boardwalk and other components would come from sources that would not increase the city's tax levy. That means other public entities, that means other kind of city mechanisms that wouldn't have an impact on the general tax levy. That means private entities, the relationships that the Wayzata Conservancy has and getting donations, whatever it may be, the overall goal and the willingness for city leaders to move forward with the project was built upon that notion. And I think since I've been here the entire time of that, I can say that we've been consistent with that. And I think this action tonight is consistent with that as well. More recently, if you look back a couple years ago, we were awarded $4 million by the state. And then just a year after that, we received special I'm going to slow down. Legislation, thank you, to utilize TIF 6 funds, which is in our downtown west TIF district, for the purposes of the design and construction of the boardwalk and docks. Why is that critical? It's critical because the TIF 6 district is overperforming, so there's a lot more increment being generated than initially thought. But typically for TIF districts, you can't use increment for parks-related projects. We received special legislation that year to allow TIF to be used for parks and rec-related projects, which is a unique approval that we received from the legislator that year. We continue to make requests from the state to get more money, and I think we're going to be successful with that. Excuse me. However, last year there was no action ultimately, just given the dynamics of the capital. But we're pretty optimistic this year. So with that, more recently, back in December, if you remember, we held a workshop to discuss finances and what our opportunities were. And then since then, staff has been working with our consultants, and now that we have updated construction costs, on a really detailed financing plan that protects the city and really kind of lays everything out there in a transparent way to kind of help you make a decision in order to move forward or not. And that's what you see in front of you tonight is really kind of the detailed sources and uses for this phase of the project, which is the boardwalk and docks. I don't know why it does it every time I go, but you can see in the first column, that is the sources and uses from earlier this year before we went out for bid and got real construction costs for bid package 1. And you can see that based on bid alternatives. Based on this, we were either going to be about $460,000 kind of in the red or short based on the funding we had, or in excess of $400,000. So essentially an $800,000 swing, depending on if we went forward with some bid alternates. There's really only 2 bid alternates that we've considered when the council approved the design in December. And that was to consider galvanized steel instead of stainless steel for the railings. That would potentially, we thought, would save $230,000. The other alternate was to potentially delay construction of the depot docks to phase 3 when the rest of the depot park was constructed. You can see that's the big one there. If we don't do that, we have more funding than the project costs. If we do that, there's a little gap there of $460,000. So that's where we were at in December. Fast forward to where we're at today. We went out for bid a couple weeks ago, and you can see the results in the second and third columns. The second column has the amount of the bid with no bid alternate, and the third column has the results of the bid with one of the bid alternates, which would be to have galvanized steel for the railings versus stainless steel. So therefore, it's a deduct of approximately $400,000. So at the end of the day, if we go with our preferred overall design, I'll say, with no alternate, you can see our gap between how much money we have and how much the cost has been increased by $745,000. But if we move forward with the alternate, with galvanized steel, you can see that we have a surplus of $114,000. I hope that makes sense. I went through a lot there, but the goal of this is just to kind of show where we are at. Where we were in December and what's changed with the updated bid alternates, and really what the bottom line is in terms of, are we over or under where we thought we were going to be? And I do want to talk about other kind of potential sources that we have coming through, but maybe I'll just pause right there to see if that makes sense or if you have any questions.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think one of the things that needs to be highlighted is the importance of the legislation with TIF District Number 6, because we are precluded from just using those funds in any which way we might like to. So it is very specific. So this legislation was really important to be able to really leverage those funds to their full capacity. Because again, we can't take that money outside the district,
Right.
and we're further limited by how we can use those funds even within the district. So,
Yeah, and I have that as I'm glad you brought that up because that is a key point. You see the second key point, TIF bonds have to be utilized by June in order to use them. And so just a little bit more detail, the doc says design that we think they're going to cost over $2 million. And typically, as I mentioned before, you cannot use TIF for parks and recreation type activities, which the docks are. So if we do not issue any bonds tonight and don't until June 6th, we will lose that ability to use TIF for that $2 million cost. So we will have to figure out another source, probably in our general fund, to cover that $2 million hit if we are planning on updating our docks.
okay.
Any other questions regarding the funding plan?
Well, I think we have some
Yes.
questions. I don't
Oh,
know if
yeah.
it's about the funding plan, but.
It is.
Okay, go ahead, Molly.
Thank you, Mayor. Manager Dahl, could you be just a little bit more clear if the delay of the depot docks is representative in that bottom line number or not? I think I found that a little confusing, so I think maybe someone else might as well.
Sure. Good question. And I think I wasn't very clear with that. So you can say, or you can see at the bottom line there, the bottom two lines, excess or deficient sources over project uses. And then you have the excess or deficient sources over project uses with bid alternates. So you can see on the top where there's deficiencies there. So we're under, there's a gap. That is with that line is assuming that we move forward with all of the docks. Down below, you can see we're in the black there, so there's a surplus that spells out that we are not building those depot docks.
Thank you.
Ultimately, not building the depot docks, we think it's going to be at $860,000 savings. We'll know what the real kind of value is once we move forward with the bidding process.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? No. No? All right.
Thank
No
you.
other questions?
All right, I'll just move along here. You know, one of the big sources, as we've talked about earlier as well, is the TIF bonds that we received special legislation for. That is the $6 million identified as the top source. You can see in this matrix here, this is all the obligations that TIF District 6 has, which is probably one of the most complex districts in the state. But you can see the, essentially the third line down is the assumption that we're bonding for this tonight. You can see the $6,145,000. That's $6 million for us to move forward with the boardwalk and taking a loan out essentially, but also there's administrative costs as well. So the cost of issuance. So that's why it's a little bit more than $6 million. You can see though the context there, there's a lot of other obligations that are involved in this district, including the pay-as-you-go projects that have already been approved. They're all they're all captured into this spreadsheet here. But the point of this is that there's a lot of obligations, but even with the $6 million, there's still a buffer there in order to move forward with this TIF bonding. So we feel, and our consultants talked with us for a long period of time, we feel that there's adequate increment coming in over the course of the term to move forward with bonding for $6 million. And that's what the funding plan is assumes. What we don't assume in our funding plan are the other potential sources that we feel really confident about, but we still know that we can't count on them until we have them in hand or we have an agreement in hand. There's four of them essentially. One is a grant that the Conservancy and staff worked on with our state legislative friends, including Senator Morrison and Representative Acomb. They got us and their committee. What is it? I always get the acronym screwed up.
It's the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources, LCCMR, and it's $200,000.
Thank you, Director Gellner. Well said. So we're very confident we're going to get that. We just don't have a written agreement because that really comes after once we move forward with phase 3. But we know that that money has been allocated to us. We also feel very confident based on just the latest news from the Conservancy that we're going to get more dollars in revenue coming in from that source. Then the two big ones are, one is a sales tax exemption, which we have lobbied for at the Capitol to ensure that we don't have to pay sales tax on both what we've already built and what we will build. And if you just do the math, if it's a $20 million project, let's say, actually a $30 million project all in with everything, and if 60% of that essentially is materials, then you take about 6 or 7% of that, which is the sales tax, you get to about $1 million. So that would come as a reimbursement for what we've already paid with phase 1, and then also what we wouldn't have to pay in the planned kind of expenses in the future. So that's a net of $1.1+ million. The other big one, the gorilla in the room, is the bonding bill. So we are in the governor's bonding bill for $7.1 million, I think, and then we've requested, based on inflation, a little bit more from the House and the Senate. So we feel like we made a lot of good traction. We know there's a heck of a surplus at the state. They're going to have one. It's just a matter of when, and hopefully they include all or most of our project in that. The important to note, the bonding bill can also be used for not only phase 2A, but also phase 2B, which is the Section Foreman's House, and future phases like the Eco Park and the Depot Park as well. So getting back to kind of just the overall kind of key points and key notes anyway. We're asking the council tonight to approve temporary bonds. Why is this? That's because there's a lot of unknowns still. We don't know how the rest of the project is going to bid out in terms of cost. We don't know how much other additional revenue sources we're going to have. So we feel like it's prudent to go back and refinance once we have those data points squared away. That could be in 6 months. It could be in 2 years. We have 3 years to figure that out. As I mentioned before, and Mayor, as you brought up appropriately, we're on a time crunch here. We do have to approve this if we're going to utilize TIF for the boardwalk and docks by June. And I also, as I mentioned before, we do need a 4/5 vote in order for an ordinance to be adopted. So the first item, the first kind of high level authorizing the ordinance requires a 4/5 vote. And then another caveat, because this is TIF, and TIF is ultimately started and approved by the HRA, they have to be aligned with the decision that the council is making here and would have to agree to a TIF pledge for the bonds between now and before the bonds are awarded. And then there's one other point here, and I think it might be a good opportunity to bring Ms. Cavilvang up here. You have seen some different amounts in the approvals. You know, you saw the $6 million in the funding plan. You saw the 6.14 in the cash flow analysis. That included the cost of administration. There's also another number, and that's in the authorization, that resolution, which provides more details of the issuance. That is $7 million. And that's essentially just to give us a little bit more flexibility. And I think maybe Stacy, if you might want to just describe that, you can do it a lot better than I can, about why it's recommended that we provide a little bit more cushion just in case.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Stacy Quilving with Ehlers and Associates. Great to see you all. As Jeff said, there's been a lot of numbers floating around that gets a little confusing. So essentially your resolution tonight or your approval is for up to $7 million in tax increment bonds. That's what your ordinance is for. Our preliminary issue is going to be for $6.55 million, and that is a temporary bond. And why that cost is at the $6.55 is because we have capitalized interest payments in there, so you don't have out-of-pocket costs. So we want the district to develop just a little bit more so we continue to have that cushion. The financing plan that we have at the end of the day, that sale of $6.55 million will net you $6 million cash that you'll have available to start paying for some costs that you have. And as Jeff said, we will look to refinance those at the time that we know more about what you get for money from the state or for others. And basically, those bonds are going to be callable anytime after August 1st of this year. So we put a short call on them to give you that flexibility. So fingers crossed, you know, you do well at the Capitol. Your staff has been great about going forward and moving forward with getting funding from other sources and looking under all the seat cushions for that and bringing some dollars to this. So it's great to see. And then the final number that we see in the TIF plan that ABDO has put together for you guys is $6.1 million, and that's essentially that if in fact you didn't get all your funding and we had to issue long-term bonds for that amount, that would be the par at that time, which flows through the plan. And as noted, we have some cushion there at the end of the day of about $600,000. What you should know is, I know there were some questions. We look at the TIF really conservatively. We don't use inflation in our projections over the next 20 years, and as you all know, values do go up, but you know, tax rates do fall, so it's a little bit of a balance of that. And I think there's always comments or questions or concerns about, well, what happens, right? What if we have another recession like we did in 2008 and 2010, or what's happening with just commercial property values for retail, essentially? Well, the reality is for this district and for these bonds in your pledge, there's two main property or projects that are pledged for this, because the other ones are going out to some of the pay-as-you-go in the districts. One of those is an apartment project, which have probably had the strongest growth in valuation that we expect to see that and stabilize for quite some time. And the other one is a smaller condominium project, which again, your house values and market, even watching what's happened down the street, have stayed predominantly strong. There would have to be a significant downturn in your market to even probably put a dent in what the projections would be for the bonds. So with that, I'm happy to stand for any other questions.
Great, thank you, Stacy. Any questions? No? All right, thank you very much.
So Madam Mayor, just to kind of wrap it up here, our staff's recommendation is to move forward and both approve the first reading and adopt the resolution. Just why, it's because Panaway Boardwalk and Docks are the cornerstone part of this project that we've been working on for 10 years and really enhancing our greatest amenity, which is Lake Minnetonka. This has been a consistent theme in our strategic plans for the last 10 years. And as we talked about before, I think we can't kind of reiterate this enough, issuing the bonds now will give the city the most flexibility by using TIF, which is special legislation we have the privilege to use. We won't have it after June, and we'll be able to keep the money in the city rather than going back to the county and being redistributed all over the place. It's one of the few tools that we have. And so that's a recommendation tonight. If the council does move forward with this, you can see the next steps. We'd have a second reading at the next council meeting. Then the ordinance would have to be published. Then at that point, we get into the kind of the technical components of the actual issuing of bonds with the rating call and then the sale. And then ultimately that would come back to the council on April 4th. And you can see the last bit we would have to refinance within 3 years, but it could be a lot less than that depending where we're at.
Okay. Question for you.
Yeah.
One action or two?
Two.
Two separate actions. Okay. And just for clarity, because we skimmed through this very
Yeah.
quickly, not only do we have a time frame to use the funds, but you made a very good point at the end. If we don't use the funds by that date, we have to turn over millions of dollars that we would otherwise be entitled to, correct? That goes back to the state and the county?
Madam Mayor, ultimately, we only have certain uses that we can use increment for. So if we don't utilize all the increment, then the TIF district will get decertified earlier, and that money that's left over goes back to the county for redistribution. So yes, it does. There's a process, but yes, it will go back to the county.
Right. Just keeping it high level, it goes
Yes.
back.
Yes.
And we don't want that money to go back. We want to keep it within the city limits for our use.
Exactly, because with all the property taxes everyone pays here, most of the money goes to St. Paul and doesn't come back, whether it's through fiscal disparities, whether it's through LGA, we don't get money back. This is one of the few ways and tools that we can keep money within the community.
Okay, thank you. All right, I will bring it back to the council for discussion. Any further questions, concerns?
No.
Well, I actually did have another question for staff. We kind of zipped through that. You just talked about why it's important for us to be able to capture these TIF funds and use them for our own purposes. And we're targeting them for Panaway. Question for you is, what other uses might we have used that money for if we don't use it for Panaway?
Councilmember Plekish, because of the state special legislation we received, we wouldn't be able to use that money for any park-related projects. So it really had to be more of a street or infrastructure. And we only have a certain dollar amount to use for like the Ferndale sidewalk. So it would have to be a really targeted type project. But essentially we would lose out on that $6 million.
And that was my point. We really don't have anything queued up that we could have used it for.
We don't have anything queued up, nor likely would we have enough revenue coming in to help pay for it either.
Okay, so this is a good thing, and it's going to help our taxpayers. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct.
Another thing, I'd like to get real clarity on if and when these bonds get issued, that there will be no burden on our property taxpayers in Wayzata. Is that correct?
Good question. So when the bonds get issued, there's a funding plan that increment will pay them. And these plans are very conservative. So in order to protect the city, that there's always increment coming in to offset the cost, the bond cost.
And I just wanted to make sure that that was clear for people, that the funding that will pay for those bonds will not come from property owners. It'll come from the spinoff of TIF. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And one other question is, if by chance HRA doesn't approve this, then what?
That's a great question. Then I think we'd have to figure out a project that would get their approval, ultimately.
Okay.
But they did approve an amended TIF plan that has the Panaway Boardwalk and docks within that as kind of an eligible cost. So this would be aligned with what they've already approved, so I'm not too concerned about that, but it's up to them.
Okay.
Okay.
That exhausts my questions, but as long as we're in council discussion now, I might as well start and be on a roll here. I have no problem with this. There was a comment made earlier in the meeting that suggested that property taxpayers would be burdened with this in some way, and I think we've pretty clearly said that they will not be. So that's not even a concern here. I think this all makes sense. I think we've got very conservative numbers. We've got a funding plan. We've got a good project, so I would be in favor of it.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. Anyone else?
Go next, Madam Mayor. I thank Councilmember Plekish for asking those few clarifying questions for the public. And I also support staff's recommendation on these two actions.
Very good. Thank you. Jeff?
Well, I want to thank all the people the last 10 years that have kind of put this together, because this has been quite a production, and it's exciting to see it coming to fruition. I too have been scouring this for any way that is going to raise our levy or cause the taxpayers an additional burden. And I realize there is potentially, if the increment weren't there, we would be. But I think we're very fortunate to have the funding from the state, the TIF funds, the potential sales tax exemption, and I don't see why we wouldn't do this. I think it's a wonderful project for the city, and I'm excited for Wayzata.
Great. Thank you. So I have to say I'm very much in favor of pursuing this option. The notion of potentially losing and having to turn over $6 million back to the state that rightfully belongs in this community is just not even an option. I mean, that's not even on the table for discussion. And so this is an incredibly appropriate use for it. Again, this is all coming from the increment of some new development along Lake Street. And so I appreciate certainly staff's creativity, Eller's support through this process, our bond council as well, and certainly the state of Minnesota in terms of just providing clarifying language to ensure that we could use these funds moving forward. Yes, I am very much in favor, and especially when we look at mechanisms that don't come from monies out of the general fund and paid for by our tax dollars. So we have two motions, two actions this evening, and so we'll take those one by one. And City Manager, I will ask for a roll call vote for each.
Sure.
For the first one, may I have a motion to approve the first reading of ordinance number 824, authorizing the issuance of general obligation temporary tax increment bonds for Panaway on Wayzata Bay?
Madam Mayor, so moved.
And second?
It's been first and seconded. Any further discussion? City Manager, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember McDonald,
Aye.
Councilmember Plekish,
Aye.
Councilmember Parkhill,
Aye.
Mayor Mouton.
Aye, that motion passes. Second action this evening, someone make a motion to adopt Resolution 12-2023, authorizing issuance and sale of general obligation temporary tax increment bonds, Series 2023A.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make that motion.
Thank you,
Second.
Alex. It's been first and seconded. Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember McDonald,
Aye.
Councilmember Plekish,
Aye.
Councilmember Parkhill,
Aye.
Mayor Mouton.
Aye, that motion passes as well. Thank you very much.
And Madam Mayor, just to note, this will be back at the next meeting then for a second reading. That will also require a 4/5 vote as well.
Okay, so that does not go on the consent agenda. It will go as a separate action item.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. Thank you. Next item under new business is to consider award of contracts for Panaway Boardwalk Materials, precast concrete, and structural steel. City Manager.
Madam Mayor, Director of Public Works and City Engineer Mike Kelly is going to be walking us through this item.
Is my mic working? Good.
It is.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. Tonight, before you, we have the consideration of two recently bid projects for the Panaway Boardwalk project. As you might remember, back in January, the council authorized solicitation of bids for each of our projects. The project team determined that the best way to do that was to break it up into at least two parts. The first being a materials part, the second being the installation and kind of the finishes, the finishing touches. There is still a potential for a third project, which might be the docks. As we work into our second phase of the project, we may include that in this next bid solicitation. That being said, last week, we opened bids for the materials, those two materials being precast concrete and structural steel. Going backwards. Feel like Jeff. Last Tuesday, the first work scope that we opened up was our precast concrete. We had two bidders, Terracon Precast LLC and Wells Concrete Products Company. As you can see on the screen, the low bidder, apparent low bidder, was Terracon Precast Concrete at $288 and $28. The construction estimate was $540,000. This one's a pretty straightforward project. It's quite under our construction estimate. Staff recommends that we would award the contract to Terracon Precast Concrete in the amount of $288,028. The second of our two work scopes is a little bit more challenging. This is our structural steel. We only received one bid. You might ask why we only got one bid. A lot of times contractors like to wait to the very last minute to open things up and review things. And in this case, trying to distinguish stainless steel and galvanized steel kind of put a couple of our bidders in a weird position. They decided not to bid. However, Construction Systems, who Onyx Strategic Partners and Klaus Anderson are quite familiar with, did put in a bid. They meet all of the standards of our responsible bidders and provided a bid of $1,985,931. This particular bid also came with an alternate. The alternate would be to substitute stainless steel materials for a galvanized steel material. And through that substitution would offer a deduction of $408,000. As you can see, compared to the estimate that we have, the original construction estimate for the base bid was about $1.45 million with an alternate of $230,000. Because we only have one bid, we offer several options for you to consider on how to deal with this particular bid. The first is accept the base bid only. Just consider the stainless steel. That's what we were originally looking at. It was part of our design. That would be an option. I'll talk about each of these options a little bit further. The second would be to accept the base bid and the alternate. The third would be to do something quite different. In this case, authorize the execution of a professional services contract for the development of shop drawings, which we would eventually need anyways, in the amount of $21,396. This allows the contractor to proceed with those shop drawings and also allows staff a little bit more time to determine whether stainless steel or galvanized steel is the best way to proceed so that we can present you with the appropriate information. The final is to reject the bid altogether, put this out for bid again in some fashion, and that takes a little bit of time, as I'll tell you in a second. So here are the pros and cons of each of those. Accept the base bid only. We don't recommend this. We want to at least evaluate the alternate and whether or not we should accept it. We don't feel that accepting the base bid on its own would allow for that opportunity. By accepting the base bid and the alternate, this is definitely an option. Again, we want to make sure that we're getting the right product for the right cost, so we'd like a little bit more time to do that. We have up to 60 days to evaluate these bids. The contractor is required to hold their bid price for 60 days. If we don't act on it within that time frame, they could be allowed to withdraw it. Our third option here, as I mentioned before, is to enter into a professional services contract with Construction Systems, Inc. to prepare the shop drawings that they would need to build these steel elements. We feel this is the best option because those bids can be held for 60 days. It offers us a little bit more time to evaluate the two different products and still get some work done in the meantime. The project stays on schedule. The only risk is the cost of those shop drawings, which at the end of the day isn't an add to the base bid. It's included in the base bid already. And the last comment is we have that time between the bid date of February 14th and April 14th for the council to ultimately act on those bids. The last would be to reject the bids. Again, this isn't recommended. A new bid takes time, about a 2-month window of time that it would take to put bids back out, accept them, run them through the process of council approval. The cost could come back higher. These are all risks and they're unknowns. They could come back lower as well, but we don't know what that would be. And at the same time, the current contractor who we have might feel that they've already won a bid and not feel interested in bidding again and have to go through the hassle of an additional bid. So those are the options in front of you and what staff recommends and what we've mentioned in our memos. First, to award the precast concrete contract to Terracon Precast in the amount of $288,028. The second would be to delay our bid decision on the structural steel so that we can do a little bit more evaluation, but at the same time authorize the execution of a professional services contract for the preparation of those shop drawings. With us tonight are Jesse Houlihan from Onyx Strategic Partners and Bob Jansen from Krause Anderson, if you have any additional questions. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Very good. Questions of staff?
Yeah, I've got one here with the thing that's up in front of us right now, 288,000. I don't have right at my fingertips the other numbers, the numbers that were expected by Krause Anderson, was it? And then the other bid, which came closer to it. I like the number, certainly, but my question is, do we have any concerns about quality or materials? Because that is, to me, substantially lower.
We do not. Thank you, Councilmember Plekish. Here are the numbers again in front of you for the
Yeah.
precast concrete. 288, yes, was significantly under the construction estimate by Krause Anderson, as well as the other bidder, Wells Concrete. However, Krause Anderson has had conversations with Terracon Precast since we've opened bids and feels confident that their price is solid. We're not sacrificing any materials. We're not sacrificing any quality with the price at 288.
Okay, and that was my concern. Thank you.
No bait and switch. Once we get there. All right. Yes, Jeff?
Will we be able to see samples of the stainless and the galvanized at some point?
Yes, one of the goals of this kind of time frame between opening the bids and actually considering the bids is to have our consultant Civitas provide samples of each so that we can determine both the aesthetic quality of them as well as the kind of how long they're going to last from a maintenance standpoint and what costs we might expect from each of the two products. At the end of the day, my job is to be able to maintain these things for their life. And I want to make sure that if stainless steel has a life of 50 years and galvanized steel has a life of 20 years, but also has a price tag of 500 grand 20 years from now, a 400 grand savings doesn't seem like a benefit right now. So I want to understand all the pieces of the puzzle as well as aesthetics for you guys when we make this determination.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to see what, even in the form that they're going to be used on the boardwalk, as if it's going to be
Yeah,
wired railings or brackets or cappings or whatever it is. My other question is, how are the subcontractors vetted? Maybe this is a question for Onyx and Kraus, but how are these guys vetted, to Alex's question and to, we sent out bids to 5 different people and we got one back. Didn't they know there was going to be galvanized and steel options and?
Yes, they did. As part of the bidding process, there are several different criteria that they have to meet, one of which, by statute, is meeting what's called the responsible contractor statute. And that means that they have to be able to pay their bills on time. They have to pay their, what did I say first? They have to pay their subcontractors on time. We look for them to provide materials and past projects. So in that case, because this is more of a structural project, I look to Onyx Strategic Partners and Kraus Anderson, who are more familiar with this type of construction, more of a building than street, sewer, water, storm sewer infrastructure. And they're familiar with the contractors that presented bids in both scenarios, precast and structural steel. The second half of your question was, excuse me if you could repeat it, please.
Well, we talked about how they were vetted, and we talked about, and you were gonna, weren't these guys
Aware that
there was going to be 800,000 in stainless steel, and because you said that there was an issue with them wanting to do one or the other, they weren't comfortable switching them out, or?
Well, yes, back to the stainless steel versus galvanized. The way most bidders work, unfortunately, in this business, a lot of them wait to the very last minute to start looking at a bid. We prepare about a 3-week window for contractors to look at it, and ideally, they would open it on day 1, and they would take 3 weeks to prepare a process and come up with a great price. What happens is they look at that more on day 18 instead of day 1, and they're kind of rushing to work with subcontractors and others to prepare the final price. And because we had these one alternate for 2 materials, stainless steel and galvanized steel, 2 of them backed out in the last 3 days, didn't want to put in the effort to determine the appropriate price, and in some cases, lazily, it's just easier to back out. So in that case, we were left with just 1 bidder, when throughout the first 2.5 weeks, we were expecting to have 3.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not, putting you on the spot. It's surprising that they didn't know there were a lot of steel in it last September and start making those considerations,
Well, at the end of the day, we've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different contractors in the preparation of our bid package and ultimately KA's and Onyx's pricing. However, until we put it out for bid, we don't know who's actually going to bid on it. So we could have conversations with 100 vendors, and at the end of the day, in this case, we ended up with 1 for structural steel that actually presented a bid. And that's always the challenge of public bidding.
I have one more question, and that is there, the 21,396 for the shop drawings, if we have them go ahead and do that, could that be a shop drawing? Like, could we get more bids with those and have that shop drawing going, and then have another contractor that could also use that shop draw? So are we definitely have to use
Construction system.
Terracon? Wait a second. No, Construction Systems. Could a different subcontractor be able to use the Construction Systems shop drawings?
No.
Okay, I was afraid of that.
These are being prepared for their own uses within their own shop for their subcontractors. They're doing their own measuring. They're doing all their quantity takeoffs for their own purposes. But as I mentioned before, the savings is in time, really. The 21,000 is already built into their base bid. So at the end of the day, when we determine whether to take just the base bid, which is stainless steel, or galvanized, which would be a deduction, those shop drawings will be useful in either scenario. So we're not wasting the dollars. If at the end of the day, we ultimately accept the bid in some form, that 21,000 is built in. The only risk would be if we decided to reject the bid.
That makes sense.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
I don't have a question, but more of a statement of, and I'm certainly not an expert in this field like Kraus and Onyx, but I mean, in my day-to-day work, I am seeing the exact same challenges with getting contractors to commit to projects. I mean, we are getting, for projects that are tens of millions of dollars, one, maybe two companies who are interested in bidding it out and doing the work. So it is just a tough market out there. And this, to the point that was made during the public forum or the statement that we should have 3 bids. I mean, even in our other projects, Mike, are you finding that we're not getting as many bids as we used to? I mean, for asphalt or any other kind of project, or are you finding more of these precast steel? Because that's what I'm dealing with in my day job, so.
Yeah, this is a little bit more specialized work. We're looking for specific things, precast concrete and structural steel. This is very detailed. The next bid package that we're going to be putting out is for somebody to build it. And there are a number of vendors that can build it, contractors that can build it. I expect we're going to see a higher number of contractors. Again, the pool is hundreds. If we can get 8, would be awesome. If we can get 3, would be awesome as well. It's always challenging when you only have one. And we are seeing things across the board, materials and contracting, that's been challenging. The other types of work that we've seen, we haven't bid out any of our other projects yet this year. But last year we saw a handful of vendors for each of them.
Yeah. And there are a lot of vendors who don't want to bid on public projects. I mean, we've got to call a spade here. And I mean, it's, the process is laborious and can be difficult, so. All right. So we have 2 actions for this evening. First, I guess I'll bring it back to the council. Any additional questions based on conversation or thoughts on moving forward? No?
Could we review options 2 and 3, I think, again? Just, I just want to, unless we're going to talk about them some more. Okay. And you're recommending 3?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So based on that, there were 2 actions being requested for this evening.
Yes, and I'll turn to our city attorney, but I believe they could be done under the same action.
I just take, yes, please. I was going to take 2.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I would recommend doing 2 to be really clear that you are awarding the bid for the first project or the first set of materials, the precast concrete, and then I think the other one you probably need to discuss which of these options, and because there's some things involved in that, and we want clarity on that. Yeah.
Okay. Very good. So let's start with action number 1. Would someone care to make a motion to award precast concrete contract to Terracon Precast LLC in the amount of $288,028? $288,028.
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
First and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. So now on to the second. There is a recommendation by staff to go ahead with option number 3, which is to delay the bid decision and authorize execution of a professional services contract for the shop drawings in the amount of $21,396. How do people feel about moving forward with that recommendation as opposed to the bid itself. Or the bid and the alternate.
I feel most
Or reject the bid.
comfortable with option 3 personally, to give us a little more flexibility with the stainless steel versus the galvanized steel, so.
Okay. And so there'll be some value engineering associated with that potentially through those shop drawings and,
Yeah, at the end of the day, behind the scenes, we want to understand the benefit of, or the potential benefit of taking the $400,000 deduct for galvanized steel, just make sure that it's worth that deduct. At the end of the day, we're always, in either scenario, 1, 2, or 3, we will be working with our contractor to determine value engineering options. Those would come back to us at some point, potentially as a change order.
okay?
Right now, we're looking at 2 specific numbers, but we'll always be looking at savings.
Perfect, thank you. Alex, what are your thoughts on the 4 options?
Well, I'm in favor of it. I think I trust City Engineer Kelly for his expertise, and I think he laid out a very rational explanation as why this is best. Gives the city the most flexibility, and we don't lose anything for it, so I'm in favor of it.
Excellent, thank you. Jeff?
I'm in favor also.
Okay. I am too. I think that the 21,000 is a good investment. It's built into the bid, so short of rejecting the bid completely, we are out nothing. We would be spending it anyway. So I think it gives us good information going forward, and we have time to reassess the bid, how we want to move forward with that. So would someone care to make a motion to authorize staff to execute a professional services contract with Construction Systems, Inc. to prepare shop drawings for structural steel of the boardwalk in the amount of $21,396?
So move, Madam Mayor.
And a second?
Second.
Been first and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? That motion passes as well.
Thank
All right, thank you. Are you leaving now, Mr. Kelly?
If you'd like me to stay for 2 tables, I will stay.
No, before you left, I just wanted to thank you for being here tonight, and please wish your Public Works crew a good couple of days. They have some long days ahead of them, and we wish them well and to be safe, and please tell them thank you on our behalf.
Yeah, they will fully appreciate that. I said very similar words this morning. It's not so much about how quickly we can get things done, it's about how safely we can get things done. I also mentioned to them that whatever they might need over these next few days, and if that means staying here overnight, we have some facilities here at our fire station that are available to them. It is about safety. I want it to be about safety, and sometimes that means I want to make sure that they can get to and from their own families to get back here. So thank you very much for your kind words. I'll pass them along.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for communicating that to them. So we'll be thinking about them.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
might be a good, just real quick second to take to ask Director Kelly if we are having a snow emergency tonight.
Based on what we have out there, we will not have a snow emergency tomorrow morning. Typically, it's 2 inches or more by 8 p.m. It's close, but it's tapering off quite a bit right now. So we will not have a snow emergency for Wednesday morning. It's highly likely that we'll have one both Thursday morning and Friday morning.
But there is no harm in people getting their cars out of the way so our Public Works crew can plow efficiently and safely.
That's correct. If you can, for those our avid viewers of the council meetings, if you could please move your cars off the street tonight, our crew would greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Okay, so you're free to go. Anyway, so we have 2 remaining items under new business that we are tabling this evening. So I will need an action on each of those. And the first is to table item 8C to consider adoption of Resolution 11-2023 denying subdivision at 1030 Lake Street East.
Do you want a motion?
Anyone? Yes?
Madam Mayor, I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Did I not say that? Or was I
Actually
not
said
clear?
action, so
Oh, well, okay.
I will
Yes,
always
to
translate
table.
that to motion.
My apologies. Okay. The second, yes, I would like a motion to table that item, please.
Well, let me be a little bit clearer. Madam Mayor, I'd like to make that motion.
Thank you so much. And a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion passes, and that item is tabled. I will appreciate a motion to table item 8D to consider adoption of Resolution 10-2023, approving development application for Cantissimo Senior Living and approval of first reading of ordinance 823, amending the official zoning map at 1405 Holdridge Terrace and 15419 and 15429 Wayzata Boulevard East.
So moved.
Would you like to repeat that motion?
No.
Do I have a second?
A second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion passes as well. That concludes new business, and we are on to the city manager's report.
Madam Mayor, the only item I wanted to bring up is just, it's a thanks and it's a congratulations to Becky Pearson and the Chamber for running a spectacular Chili Open event last weekend. Of course, with the assistance of a lot of our community members who put many hours into it. Public Works Department, Police Department, I saw the Fire Department out there today. But by and large, it's really led by Becky and her staff. And I've only heard a lot of compliments this year. You know, there's a lot of people that come into town, and some of them have some beverages, and it's all in good fun, and you see a lot of smiles. But even more so than previous years, everyone was so well behaved. Everything was so orderly, and just a really fun event. We don't have those often in the winter, so the enthusiasm and the positivity and the traffic that we bring in during that day is really impressive, and it's all thanks to the Chamber. So I just want to say thanks and congratulations, Ms. Pearson. And I don't know if the council had any impressions or staff, but it seemed like it was a very successful event. We did not win the chili, by the way, so we're, honestly a
wasn't
little
asked
bit
to-
bitter about that, but we'll get through that.
I wasn't asked to be a judge. Otherwise, I'm thinking we stood a chance.
Maybe that's why.
I might have been, yeah, I know, maybe that's
You're
why I wasn't
biased.
asked. I know. But, hey, I'm not bitter. On the flip side, no, that did hear really great things about the event. And it's a nice, bright kind of pick-me-up. People have fun and enjoy it, and it's light, and that's fantastic. Now, we do have curling again, although I don't know if anybody's going to be able to find the curling for the next few weeks. But it's out there if anybody should be interested.
It's out there, and it's really creative what our Panaway District Committee team and our communications staff put together. There's a QR code with all the instructions to play. You have to enter some contact information because we've had issues before with some of the equipment getting stolen. But in order to access it, you have to put your, there's some strings attached, so we feel we have a better handle on the equipment, and I'm anxious to see how it's being utilized, but it's for the community to go out and enjoy, so please do.
Do we have the little fire pits also? We do. Fun. Excellent. Always a fun environment. So, anything else, City Manager? No?
Oh, thank you.
All right. Anything from the council? No? All right. Well, I hope everybody gets home safely. Thank you all for coming out on a snowy night. And it'll be interesting to see what the snow apocalypse brings, but hopefully it won't be too disruptive to everyone. So, last item of business this evening is just to check real quick. We don't have anybody on Zoom with any last-minute comments? No?
Nope.
Would someone care to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
And a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.